Regular meeting of the Redondo Beach Budget and Finance Commission. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Nguyen?
Here.
Commissioner Solomon?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Vice Chair Esser?
Here. Okay, so would Commissioner Solomon please lead us to the salute and flag?
Ready? Begin.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so I know we're changing the order of the agenda. So we're going to have the treasurer report go first.
Make a motion to,
Could we make
Yeah.
one more change?
Sure.
So basically, could we make the budget input, which is now item number 6, make that 8?
Okay,
And then, like you said, the treasurer's report is now 8, make that 6.
okay,
So we'll leave the Moss Adams report as the second item you discuss.
okay. Motion to approve?
make a motion to
Yeah.
move the treasurer's report to item 1 on the agenda,
Or item 6?
or item 6, I beg your pardon, on the agenda.
You need a second?
I second.
Okay.
Oh, I can't second.
Second. I'll second.
Oh,
Mindy, you can call for a vote.
all right. All approved?
Aye. Aye.
Okay. All right. So there's no blue folder items. So we'll go down to the consent calendar. Would any commissioners like to pull any items from the consent calendar? I don't know if we have any, do we?
Make a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Okay. Approval of affidavit of the posting for the regular Budget and Finance Commission meeting of March 14th, 2019. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay, so we got approval of the minutes for the regular meeting of February 14th, 2019. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the February 14th meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, approved. There's no excluded items from the consent calendar. So is there any public participation on non-agenda items? Nope. All right, and there's no old business. And so we're down to the new business. So we've got the City Treasurer's second quarter 2018-19 report.
Hello and thank you. My name is Stephen Deals. I am the City Treasurer, and with me is Nilesh Mehta, my Chief Deputy City Treasurer, and we are here to present to you the Redondo Beach fiscal year 18-19 second quarter report. In this report and in your administrative report, we include the investment reporting guidelines, the quarterly performance. We do include a historical comparison, I think going back now 5 years. We include the sector allocation. We let you know how we are with respect to our policy compliance and then our trading activity, among other details. Key investment objectives are always in this order of priority: safety, liquidity, and yield. You are all seasoned veterans now and are not new and have all heard this before. For the sake of the public or anybody that might be viewing, I don't know, do we film this? Is this on? Okay, so the priority of investment, especially with public funds, is in this order: it's safety, liquidity, and yield. So safety, we protect the principal. Second, we make sure that the money is available when the city needs to spend it. And yield, we want to make sure that we're meeting our budgeted income objectives and also maximize earnings while we're still recognizing the need for safety and liquidity. And then also managing the compliance with the policy. So the next two slides cover that. And then as a board, these are questions for you to ask. Do you review the investment policy, which you do? Do you understand the city's investment program? If you don't, ask questions. They're fine to do that. You can ask me in public or in private, but it's always good to understand. And then the point there is if you don't understand the reports or the program, there's a chance that it's not your fault, that it's my ability or our ability to generate this information for you. So it's always good to ask questions. Okay, next, this is a comparison of the performance between quarter one and quarter two. We do this for the entire year. And then this is where, if you want to go to the next slide, we show you for 17-18 the whole year. And then you go back and compare quarter by quarter, year over year. Here's 16-17. And then this is where our money is invested by sector. You've got agencies, most of the money, corporates 13%, almost 14%. LAIF, a rather large portion this year because, or at least for this quarter, because we had a large influx of cash in December from our property tax. And then, of course, we've got a little bit in CDs and some in treasuries. And next, this is maturity distribution based on when this our investments are maturing. We have a lot in very short term. We've got interest rates rising right now, and also this includes that large influx of cash that we got from in December, as I said before, from our property tax returns. And then this is the book yield. It's been increasing. Basically, interest rates are rising, and as a result, so is our yield. That's it in a nutshell. And then the book value, you see it ticking back up. The large drop back in 17 is representative of the prepayment of the PERS that we began doing. So, but we should hopefully see a continued rise in portfolio going forward, given that adjustment. This is policy compliance. Everything's a yes. Every once in a while there's a no. And as I've said before, I kind of like it when there's a no because it's a good point of discussion to show you that while we might be out of compliance at the moment, we have to take action to return to compliance. In this case, everything's in compliance, even despite the large amount of cash that we received in December. And then our trading activity is relatively modest. And as you can see in October, November, and December, that quarter, we had very few purchases and a few redemptions, which of course also contributes to the high cash balance that we showed you. And that's it in a nutshell. Any questions?
Steve, our benchmark, our rate of return, this is our first quarter where we've used a different benchmark that was approved in December to change, going from the 2-year T-note to the 0 to 5 Treasury index moving average. In the first quarter, we were below benchmark using the old numbers, and in this quarter, we're above benchmark using the new revised benchmark. Do we know where we would have landed if we were using the old benchmark?
I don't know. I haven't gone back to check that. To be honest with you, it'd be an interesting comparison, but we didn't do it. But the point of the benchmark was to have something that matches more closely what our actual investment strategy is. So that was really the point there. But I don't know. It's an interesting question.
But this was our first quarter using the new benchmark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think you answered, I know you answered the one question. Our increase in LAIF was about 8% or so. That was a result of the influx of cash.
Yes.
from
And
the
then we
property
didn't
taxes.
reinvest a lot of that for the longer term because we had this big prepayment coming.
So, our average rate of return was, let's see, so we're at 1.7%. So, or I'm sorry, 1.77%. that should be effectively going up, right? I mean, because like online savings accounts are over 2%. So it just seems kind of, I'm surprised that it's this low.
Well, it is going up. So what's interesting, if you go back to the slide with the laddered portfolio, so what's going up faster than long-term rates are short-term rates. So as you can see, we've got so much in short-term where most of the increase in interest rate returns are right now.
Yeah.
So the portfolio in total doesn't increase automatically. It increases incrementally. So as securities mature and as we get revenue and as we can invest it according to new interest rates, the new higher rates, then the portfolio incrementally increases. What's interesting about this is I've now been through a rising interest rate environment, well, we're in one now, and a decreasing interest rate environment. So when the interest rate environment was decreasing, the same thing happened, there was a lag. So while the interest rates were decreasing, our portfolio looked great compared to market rates because interest rates were declining, but we still had pre-purchase maturities that were taking a longer time to mature. We were getting the higher interest rate because they're fixed income investments. So it just catches up. It's kind of the beauty of the laddered portfolio that we have. I mean, we could sell everything right now and put it all into short term, but we just don't do that. So it increases incrementally and not in total.
What are we expecting, to gain in the next third, fourth quarter? I mean, where do we think we're gonna end? We're gonna be over 2%?
I'm not a prognosticator on interest rates. I'm not, that's above my pay grade.
Okay.
With some of the volatility in the market, was there talk about maybe seeing our holdings in corporates diluted a little bit in favor of some more fixed income with the chances of a rising interest rate environment, or hasn't been discussed? What were your thoughts there?
Well, the market volatility, I assume you're referring to the stock market, and we don't invest in equities, so everything we have is fixed income, even the corporates. So we did increase our percentage of corporate holdings to increase our yield a little bit, but other than that, there's no major change in strategy planned.
I look at the market volatility as indicative of what the economy might be doing or could be doing in the future. When Rick was here last time, we talked about whether or not there was going to be a chance of recession within the first few quarters of 19. You saw a lot of volatility in the stock market in 19, downward pressure on housing prices, consumer index, downward pressure on consumer index, a downward pressure on retail sales, and those sorts of things. That's why I asked the question, if the corporates are going to have to pay a higher yield in order to compete, or if they're going to be weakened by some of the volatility in the retail markets and other markets.
Yeah, well, as long as there's no additional risk. If there's market risk or interest rate risk, then we'd be taking a look at that, not just at the yield. So no major change in strategy. And in terms of market volatility, it's interesting that we do invest in fixed income securities. So when the market goes crazy, it gives us a relative change with respect to our market value, but our returns are always the same. They're guaranteed.
I understand. It just might impact what the Fed could do. Chairman Powell decides that he's not going to take 50 basis points this year, that he's going to go ahead and leave things flat.
Yeah. That's an external, we just that's why we have the strategy we have. I'm really reluctant to act like I know what I'm talking about when other people are in control.
Okay.
So.
And as far as looking at our returns, once we typically look at things in terms of book value, and there was some reflection of what the difference was between our book value and market value in the latest report, so I appreciate that.
There always has been. We've not changed the reporting. We always report on market rate, and we always report on book value, too.
Our market value was about $645,000 below the book value. And I'm wondering if, when we do our reporting on meeting benchmark, if we ever look at the comparison, what it would be book value versus market value, and what our benchmark or what our performance is compared to benchmark.
We always report on market rates of return in this report, and we always have. So,
Well, the benchmark's according to book value here.
well, the book value is more representative of what we paid for the security and what we're going to earn on the security, as opposed to market rates, which fluctuate. So we always report on the market rate on every report. And we don't have a benchmark that's based on market rate, because we don't have an active portfolio. We're not selling the portfolio based on the market rate.
We have unrealized losses.
That's why, and we have unrealized gains at times too. That's why it's not emphasized.
I just wondered if we report on it, that's all.
Yeah, of course, we report on the market rate on every report. Yes, we do. Market rate and book rate. Yes, we do.
Our returns that we see here, the historical rate of return is based on book value,
Yes.
and our current rate of return is based on book value. So
Yes.
maybe I missed it. Are you saying that there is somewhere in here a rate of return based on market value versus book value?
Yes, you just quoted the difference between the market.
Okay, that's
Value.
645.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Gene, you're speaking of the adjusted interest yield based on market value of the securities, which we probably don't do. But as you pointed out, Steve, the last time that, the rates fell, then our market value looked pretty good
Yeah.
because of the laddered approach.
Yeah.
And now it doesn't. So
Right, and in a rising interest rate environment, because there's that lag time. So it's just interesting, when rates are going up, we're like, how come we're not earning more money? Well, we've got investments that are laddered. And then when interest rates are falling, suddenly we're doing great relative to the market. So, but again, as I emphasized before, it's just important to note that we have an obligation to deliver cash according to the spending patterns of the city, and we have an obligation to deliver revenue close to or exceeding what we project for budgetary purposes. So we can't take big risks on moving cash around at the expense of not being able to provide cash when the city needs it. That's the safety, liquidity, yield priorities.
Okay,
thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
A motion to receive?
Yes, can we get a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
Chairman.
so, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we're on to item number 7, receive and file Moss Adams roles and responsibilities reviews. Eleanor is going to present that.
Thank you for allowing me to go.
Yeah, no problem. Hi.
Okay. Hi, I'm Eleanor Manzano, the city clerk. Today we have Moss Adams. They've been with us for, I think, almost 3 years. And they're here to speak about the roles and responsibilities between the clerk, treasurer, and finance, and then also payroll and human resource. So I have Colleen Rosilis. Go away.
Hi, everyone. For the record, Colleen Rosilis from Moss Adams. I'm a senior manager in our internal audit practice. So I'm here today to present the results of 2 roles and responsibilities reviews that we completed in the first half of the fiscal year. The first report that I'm going to talk about is the clerk, treasurer, finance. That's the exciting one. Maybe I should have left that till the end now that I'm thinking about it. Anyway, this review was requested by the clerk and the treasurer. You have a unique operating environment here that's dictated by the charter, and our primary recommendation when I get into the report is related to a charter change because it's quite unique and actually causes a lot of inefficiencies as a result. But understanding that a charter change is above everyone's pay grade, to quote Steve, in the absence of that, we've provided recommendations to improve efficiencies, make roles and responsibilities more clear, and also help to reduce some of the risk of that unclear operating environment. So I wanted to just point you to page 5 of the report and talk a little bit about the environment that we are in recommendation 1. So there are 3 layers of authority when we talk about municipal government and how it's defined. And the first layer is the city charter. And the city charter really establishes the framework for how the city is going to operate. The city charter needs to specify that administrative departments, and this is according to best practice, report to either the city manager or the mayor. Your city charter does not do that. And as a result, we're here today doing this roles and responsibilities review. The next layer down is the municipal code. The municipal code should have the duties of all of the departments laid out. The finance department's duties should be in the municipal code, talking about authority and roles and responsibilities there. And then the next layer is city policy. And as you go down in layers, there's less of an issue with changing the policies or changing the municipal code compared to the charter that has to go to a public vote, so it allows for more flexibility. And what's really important is that we take a look at our policies and the code and the charter on a regular basis to see if they're meeting contemporary business practices. And we know as a result of this analysis that currently that's not. So our first recommendation here is to either revise the charter. If we can't revise the charter, revise the municipal code and city policies so that we have clearly delineated the roles and responsibilities related to managing the city's finances in accordance with best practices. And best practices for the finance department to have that operational role. And if dictated by the charter, the clerk and the treasurer have an oversight role, then that needs to be clearly defined in city policy as well. Right now, you have an environment that doesn't have a lot of definitions and 2 elected positions. And so those people can change, it might be every 4 years, it could be at any time. And as a result of that, any positive working relationship, any good responsibility definition that is currently personality-based can change and throw the whole system upside down. We have some clients where this has occurred, and so there's a new election, and then the entire budget department disappears. And you don't want that to happen, right? We want to get some of this stuff codified so that we can move on and get the real work done. Specific to the roles of the clerk, so because of the fiduciary responsibility that is dictated in the charter, your clerk's position is actually quite unique and requires either someone with a financial background or a certain amount of financial education to provide the oversight that's dictated by the charter. As a result, you're probably not using the clerk at that position's highest and best use because they really should be focused on the duties of the clerk and not necessarily financial duties. So we have some recommendations for the clerk's duties. We have 2 recommendations here, which is to either delegate all the responsibilities to the financial services department, eliminating the education requirements from the charter and really having a pure clerk role. Clerkship is a profession, and there are people who spend their whole lives in clerkship, and they tend to not also spend time in finance departments. You're lucky to have one in that current role, but that might be 1 in a million. Or what we would recommend in absence of that charter change is to transition the role to really be in a strategic oversight role and to not have any day-to-day responsibility and delegate that to finance. Yep.
When you say transition that, are you talking about not having it be an elected person, or are you talking about further defining the current elected person?
Further defining the current role.
Thank you.
Yeah, to remove the financial responsibilities. So on to the treasurer and the finance department. I'm going to, go
Before we
ahead.
shift away from that, on page 6, where we have the clerk roles and responsibilities, there's an overview. And so it talks about the traditional roles, which I understand. And then it says, in addition to these traditional roles, the city clerk in Redondo Beach has several fiduciary duties: budget preparation, supervising expenditures, maintaining the accounting system, and financial monitoring. So I'm a little confused here. Are you saying this is what the charter says that they do, or that's what they actually do?
This is what the charter says that the clerk should do.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's not what they're doing.
Right,
Thank
right.
goodness, because I would have said, in 5 years, I didn't think you were doing that. I would have been. So what you're recommending then is that we change the charter or delegate those responsibilities to what the finance department is already doing?
Yes.
Okay, got it,
Yep.
thank you. When did you become engaged to do this particular report? Roughly?
So this was part of our fiscal year 18-19 work program, so July 1st.
Okay,
Yeah.
right, thank you.
And I think we got, I can't
If we
remember when we got
delegate,
started.
then it does not come down to changing the city charter. It comes under municipal code.
It would, yeah, it would be a policy, and we'd like to see the policy come before council.
Oh, okay, so it wouldn't even be a municipal code, it would be down in the city policy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't really adopt a policy, an ordinance or a policy that supersedes the charter, but what
Okay.
you can do is adopt a policy that says, this is what we're gonna do with these responsibilities at this time. And then if you're able to change the charter in the future, great.
Yeah, I didn't know if you addressed that question, but does the charter or the code address delegation of authority and who has right? It does not.
No.
So who would delegate that? The city manager or the council?
So if it's in the municipal code, that's an ordinance that's passed by the city council. If it's a city policy, then it would be the city manager. We would want the city manager in conjunction with the clerk to issue that policy because the clerk is an elected position, city manager is appointed by the council. So we'd want them to together.
So is there then a clear recommendation that which is the most effective way to do this, via delegation or what? Which?
The number one most effective way to do this is to change your charter
Okay.
and have it match standard practice. Understanding that that's a longer term process, that you have to put an amendment before the public. At least in the interim, delegate that authority formally.
And in the interim, there's minimal risk. You know, finance has been doing these activities for years. And as you said, there's some chance of overlap and missing something, but, you know, we've got our ongoing audits and other things. So it's really getting our authorizations in order that we're trying to do here. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, stronger governance, stronger lines of authority. Yep.
What's the, when it comes to, and I don't know, should we let you go ahead and make the presentation? I have lots of questions, but
Well, I
I'm
just
thinking
have-
we should let you
I
present.
can
and
give you
then-
one more sentence, which is related to treasurer and finance. Both of those recommendations are really, we have a good system in place where authority has been delegated, but it has not been formally delegated. So all we need to do is codify what is in place, which is working for all of the parties involved. And that's what our recommendations for treasurer and finance are. So now my presentation is done. Go ahead. Question.
So,
Question. Oh,
go ahead, man, sorry.
So we're updating city policy, right? But city policy can be undone down the road, right, depending on the administration. So you're saying the only true way to keep it intact for generations to come. Oh, you're right, See, oh, sorry. Sorry, everybody. Where was I? Okay, so
To come.
yeah, in order to have it set in stone for generations to come, it has to be a city charter.
Well, yeah, I mean, not only that, but your charter, having the financial responsibility to the clerk is very unique. Look, I've been doing this for about 15 years. I've worked with hundreds of cities and counties. You're the first place I've ever seen that. And really what you're doing is you're excluding people from potentially running for clerk who would be extremely qualified because they don't have those financial responsibilities or don't want to perform those duties. It would be better to match what your peers are doing so that you're able to get the right folks and have your organization run optimally.
Good.
Thank you. So a couple of questions, please. The first one is, when you're talking about one of those three layers, the city charter amendment would obviously be the most rigidly enforced. A municipal code would perhaps be equally or just slightly less enforceable. And then you have the city policy itself. So if we find somebody, if we do this by virtue of a city policy, what is, in your experience, the enforcement mechanism that cities use if we find that the city is out of guideline or one of those representatives is out of guidelines for that policy?
Yeah, so that would be either for an appointed or just sort of general service employees. That would be through the personnel practices, so your MOUs and your employment agreements and the discipline practice there. For folks who are elected or for the city manager and serve at the pleasure of the council, then that's a process that would occur through those mechanisms.
Well, an elected official doesn't serve at the pleasure of the council.
Yeah, so is there a censure process in place, or, I mean, the council would have to decide to investigate, I think.
If I'm the city clerk and a resident points out that we're in violation of, the city clerk is in violation of something. If I'm the treasurer and we're in violation of our investment guidelines.
Right.
What is the mechanism in place if it's merely a guideline rather than if it's a part of our charter or if it's part of our municipal code? Clearly, through the municipal code or the charter, there's redress, appropriate redress,
Right.
but not for city policy that I'm aware of.
I mean, they can go to council, and then the city manager can change that policy and take it to council. I mean, that's
So
normally.
it would merely be that the resident, taxpayer, whoever, that recognize this as an issue would then go to the city council and say, we're out of guidelines here, do something, amend the municipal code, or, and if you can't tell an elected official if we have a city guideline to stop.
Right.
So I would think that if that's the case, then we would want to, it would be more effective, that it be part of the city charter or the municipal code rather than a guideline. And your experience, the charter and municipal code, just to make sure I'm getting this right, are the most effective mechanisms of enforcement for a problem if it arises?
There's certainly more accountability associated with that, yeah.
Okay. The reason I ask is because the language that you used I found to be impactful, in that the language here on page 5, recommendation 1 on the report, it says, in addition to this overlap, the city's charter includes 2 significant abnormalities. And it lays out things that we do, and if I understand what you said correctly, is something like the first ever, not, this part of it's not the first ever. The treasurer is a separate elected office rather than a function performed by a chief financial officer, and that the charter assigns the clerk duties encompassing expenditure functions, and requires officers to have financial management and education experience, which you covered. So in your experience, Redondo is, if not unique, on the outlier side of this, in
Yeah,
this regard.
quite unique. From the perspective of the clerk, again, that's something that we have really never seen before. With the elected treasurer, so you operate a little bit more like a county than a city in that regard. So many counties have elected treasurers. Most cities in California, it's the duty of the CFO and not a separately elected treasurer.
So with our treasurer's role, the only requirement to become to be elected as Redondo Beach City Treasurer is that you've essentially lived in the city for 30 days. It doesn't require any financial background or experience. Is it a recommendation or an idea that if we make a charter amendment based on the treasurer's role, that where we would maybe not have financial requirements associated with the clerk, that we would have financial requirements associated with the treasurer's office?
Yeah, so, we didn't look at that specifically, but what I would suggest if you're going to do a charter amendment would be to look at charters of your peers. Look at what the charters of the cities around you or other cities in California that you are like, and especially if there are folks who have gone through any comprehensive charter reform in recent years. There are some cities that have had charter committees that have redone their whole charters. See what those look like and try to really move toward standardization and best practice. And there are quite a few industry resources as well that can that provide guidelines.
Okay. This might be a question for you, please, Marnie, if I may. We've talked a little bit tonight about how certain duties have been delegated to the Financial Services Department. Can you give us an idea of how something like that has evolved, where the clerk or the treasurer had traditionally used that role and they had asked the Financial Services Department to start taking on some of these responsibilities? Or was it that it was something that was from back way before any of us were here, that this is what's been going on? How it evolved to the current state of things?
So I can go back pretty far because I've been here a long time. When I first started, the city clerk actually served as the department head of just the accounting department is all it was. It wasn't a finance department. The accounting department did not do the budget. It really did just accounting, payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, the CAFR. And yeah, purchasing wasn't even in finance. Budget was with city manager and all that. So at that time, we had an accounting manager, but the department head really was the city clerk. The city clerk at the time, it was back when John Oliver was city clerk. He actually started that process to turn finance into a department. And it happened kind of gradually. The biggest piece coming to finance was the budget, and that's kind of come and gone. City manager, one of the city managers we had, took it away from finance and made it a committee of all the departments.
This wasn't some seismic shift when, let's say, in 2008 and 9, when we had the economic downturn, it was all hands on deck, and we started shedding employees, and people started taking on other responsibilities. It was more of a slow-moving thing?
It was more gradual, yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned in your report that currently, on page 4 here, that we don't have, I think it was on page 4, or it was item number 4, I beg your pardon, of your recommendations. We don't have established regular reporting requirements between the departments. Now, is that something also that you're recommending be something put in the charter or by municipal code, or that's better served as a city guideline or policy?
That's better served as a policy, and that really should be something that is a constant conversation between the three entities if they continue to operate and the clerk and the treasurer still have oversight responsibilities.
Okay. You run into cities, I know Hermosa has it on their ballot. You run into cities that have appointed versus elected officials in these capacities?
Certainly the treasurer position, yeah. As I mentioned, it's often the CFO is also the treasurer.
The treasurer's position is often an appointed rather than an elected position. And I know that, is it Hermosa was looking to have the city clerk be an appointed versus elected. Is that less common, the same, as common or not as common as the city treasurer?
In California, I think clerks are much more likely to be elected. If we look nationwide, it might be 50-50.
So in our instance, you keep referring to CFO. Do you consider our director of finance to be a parallel position to CFO you see in other organizations?
Oh, yeah, I use those terms interchangeably.
Okay.
Yeah, it's easier to say CFO. It's like one less syllable.
And is this something that's not, as far as state government code or as far as generally accepted practices like GAAP or something like that, does that speak to any of the issues about having an elected versus an appointed clerk or an elected versus appointed treasurer? So it's simply a matter of choice based on what that city, whether it be a charter city or otherwise formulated city, has done in the past or would like to do going forward.
Yeah, and what I would say is just that, we have city founders who wrote a charter. There were reasons why the charter was drafted that way. We often don't look back at our founding documents and say, is this meeting our business needs? But especially the pace of business and the way that we achieve our financial goals has changed really significantly in the past decade, and it will likely continue to change. And so that's something that we need to just look at as city leadership and say, is this meeting our needs, and does this match up with the business that we want to run?
Okay. And then you had a recommendation here about the overlap. So in determining these things, it says here on item number 2, recommendations on page 9 of the report, delegate all assigned, you list several choices, some of which is to either have the clerk delegate financial responsibility and it's entirely beyond what we're currently doing to the financial services department, or have the clerk transition to a more permanent role, or work with the finance department, take on those responsibilities. Sorry, Eleanor, I'm not pretending you're not here.
No.
It's not my intention. That our choices are, have the clerk take on more responsibilities, further define those responsibilities that are delegated to our CFO, our finance director, or 3, have the clerk function simply take over those roles once again in its entirety.
No, so we would not recommend that the clerk take on additional financial responsibilities. It's not in the core skill set or service area that we would want to see a clerk providing. We want the clerk focused on providing those services that are core to clerkship and not to financial services. And you have a finance director, you have a finance department, they should be performing the financial duties.
And then have the clerk continue to perform more of an oversight function. Okay.
So in short, I mean, your recommendation is pretty clear. I mean, the way that it's operating, in fact, is the way it should be operating, and we just need to fix up our paperwork, so to speak.
And work toward changing that charter.
However, are we, in your recommendation on the oversight capacity for the treasurer, I think it's a recommendation or observation number 4, is that currently being done? Establishing auditing functions and ensure oversight of the revenue collection and administration, including revenue variances, bank account reconciliations and such? I don't think that's being done, right?
No, so
that's new.
The reports are being provided, but what is done with those reports is not necessarily a formalized program.
Okay, but you're recommending that it be establishing that.
Yeah.
The
In order
treasurer's
to meet
role
the
as
charter
an audit.
responsibilities, essentially. Yeah.
So the treasurer would take on that audit functionality.
Yeah, and
there
there
for
was
that. I
there
think
was
that's
concern
good.
at the beginning of the study that on the part of the clerk and treasurer that both we want to make sure we're operating appropriately, but also are we meeting our charter responsibilities? So recommendation number 4 is really about the treasurer's office has to meet charter responsibilities. Were we to revise the charter to remove these responsibilities in accordance with common practice, then this would not necessarily need to be in place.
So I'm just going to go back and try and clean up our history, make sure I'm understanding it correctly again. So when we had Ernie here, Ernie left, and we went to, we had a charter amendment that made our treasurer in 2015, I think was a charter amendment, it was voted on, a part-time role.
Right.
And I think that transitioned about the time that Ernie left, and Steve, we had Tom Guyan come in as the acting city treasurer and began delegating responsibilities to outside vendors like FTN, our asset management. And then about that same time, that's why I was asking about sort of an all-hands-on-deck thing, in between the time we had an acting city treasurer and then we had our current city treasurer elected in 2013, were some of those roles transitioned or things transitioned into the finance department at that time when it became part-time, or was it something that was already taking place when Ernie was here?
So most of the transition happened while Ernie was here. At the beginning of Ernie's term, the city treasurer included licensing and cashiering. And both those functions were, during his term, turned over to finance.
Okay. So we have changed our charter amendment. We've usually done it, or charter, we've usually done it in a targeted way. We haven't had a full-blown committee or anything like that take place. So these are all great points, and thank you for the report. It's been great to read.
I just want to mention regarding, because, since I've been doing this position for a while, that we have taken, they've been numerous times that it's gone to the public to the voters, to remove the finance from the city clerk and to push it off to the city manager. And in all cases, they failed. So I think, having the city clerk have that, still have some of that oversight, so that the public feels comfortable that there's someone looking at the expenditures, and then you got the city treasurer looking at the revenues. So that's just my input related to what I'm seeing here. And because I have that accounting background where I think it's been prior, maybe a couple former city clerks that had some in-depth. So for me, it's always been, pretty much easily to be able to look at some of the stuff because I was the accounting manager before. So that's just the difference. But going forward, once that time of retirement, then it's going to be who's that next person that's are they going to be heavily in city clerk? And then they have to have that background of 5 years of a governmental accounting or those 15 units of, which is sort of, hard.
You had mentioned that, thank you. You had mentioned that the city clerkship has largely become a profession of sorts.
It is a profession,
yeah.
yes, yes.
So not of sorts then, it is a profession. In that profession, is it typical for someone to have the type of background that Eleanor has with an accounting background, or is it atypical?
It's, like I said before, one in a million. She's a unicorn, yeah.
I think there's one city, I forgot. There is another city that I remember going to conferences that have some part of financial services.
You would have
but it's just really rare.
It'd be lucky to get someone who maybe had a career change, right? Who had been in municipal finance and then wanted to become a clerk instead.
But to have an election, to have a requirement in a charter, to have those specific specifications, I think is probably, as you say, a unicorn.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions on this one?
Just a quick question. The requirement for the 5 years experience, was that in the original charter, or was that added at some point?
What was that?
It's in the charter. I don't know if it
The
was.
5 years?
Yeah, is that an original
My understanding
requirement?
is even prior to my time that it was added. It wasn't original, but it has been there a long, long time.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was added from the two former the city clerk. I think it was more to keep him stable inside that position. So every time he would add something, and then that was the result.
Okay.
And that's not the purpose of a city charter.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'll just move on to quickly cover HR and payroll. This report is more operational. This was requested by finance as we were looking at roles and responsibilities in their department anyway, because there were some concerns because of the staffing levels in both HR and finance related to payroll processing, that there may be increased risk in the payroll cycle because they can't segregate duties as much as they would like to among the existing staff. So we had 4 recommendations here. And our first was related to limited staffing, making sure that we have policies and procedures when there are times of limited staff, so that we're able to really ensure duties are properly segregated and everything occurs as it should. We also had a recommendation about system controls, so that payroll authorization and payroll review were done by different people. We had a recommendation about pay codes. Those should be done collaboratively between the two departments. And then finally, we had an observation about the way that the payroll system is set up to bank PTO. And so that issue has been corrected. But at the time, the PTO accrual was not being calculated appropriately.
What was the amount of the accrual over the limit in dollars?
Marnie, do you know the answer to that?
I don't know.
Maybe we could get that another time, because that
Yeah.
could be an interesting number. I mean, I don't know how long, if people have been banking unlimited for years. That could be an interesting number.
Yeah, and the CAFR should also include what that liability is.
And it wasn't unlimited, because the MOUs have changed a bit over time, but it was cashed out each year. And there's a little bit less of that in the MOUs now. But even with that cashing out, there was still a limit for that year.
Right.
It couldn't be
So-
over this amount. So it was at times more than it should be, but it wasn't unlimited.
So rather than me saying right, I guess I should ask. So let's say that somebody had a limit of 300 hours that they could accrue, and halfway through the year, they were at their limit. What should happen is they should stop accruing.
Yes.
Okay, and we didn't do that. So it wasn't like it went on for years and years, and we had.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was just within the year.
Yes.
Whatever they could accrue during that year. Yeah, okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, there were, we had things in place where you were looking at, you couldn't use more time than you had on the books. But
Not
it
the other
took,
way.
it took they call it an investment assessment with our software company to learn how to put on the other end, can't go above.
So in effect, there should have been no financial impact because we would have told the employees, sorry, but you weren't entitled to that 60 hours that we showed as accrued for you.
Well, really, it turns out to be the same because now, because the employee has the choice, I'm either going to keep it on the books and use it or get cashed out at the end of the year, or I'm paid for my overtime. And so it's really just a matter of the timing of the payment. Now the payment happens at the time they reach the limit, as opposed to the end of the year.
So if you reach the limit, I'm kind of, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but as you reach the limit, there's no payment because you're at the limit. So how often do
Well,
they have?
it's overtime worked, so we have to pay for that overtime, and it's always the employee's choice whether they're going to be paid for that with time on the books that they can take off later, or if they don't, they get cashed out, or they are paid for their overtime on that particular paycheck. But it's still overtime work that they have to be compensated for.
Not getting it, but that's fine.
So,
I'm going to say one last thing. If I'm maxed on my vacation and I don't take vacation next week, that's not overtime. I'm just not taking vacation.
Right.
So then it's not overtime or vacation.
But
It's time that shouldn't
Yeah,
be
this
further accrued that
particular,
week.
particular item is overtime.
Okay. Probably more minutia than this committee needs to be involved in.
the operational report. Just one thing I wanted to note about this is,
Like the operational.
I can tell,
You've been waiting for it.
Where's this been?
nothing in this analysis rose to the level of a finding. You'll note that this report is written as all observations and recommendations, so these are opportunities for improvement, but nothing was a finding. So just wanted to note that. Payroll is an area where sometimes there are findings.
So basically, this is going to go to council, and then, and the recommendations, and they're going to, approve your recommendations of going forward.
Typically, the typical process would be this committee forwards to council. Council would accept the report and then direct management to develop an implementation plan.
Okay.
On page 7, your observation recommendation number 1, you talk about establish alternate policies and procedures to ensure all compensation and benefits records are accurate and properly maintained during times of limited staff. Marnie, you may know this, or Eleanor, when it comes to certain protocols within department, within payroll, do we have certain staff, is there limited permissions where certain staff people have access and certain staff people do not, which may further complicate limited staffing and the reporting and putting more hours onto personnel? Are there limited permissions within the HR department for access to these records?
So you'll see the recommendation here is to separate that, where HR would have ability to change items in an employee's, we call it master file, and payroll would not. Currently, just so we can get things done, we both have it. So that was part of the need for the report was to say, okay, well, what is the best practice? How do we get this divided up and all that?
Yeah, typically, the people processing the payroll would not update the HR master data.
Exactly,
Or have
And-
access or permission to access the data.
exactly.
So in this case, we're talking about limited staffing. Were you comfortable that there was sufficient staffing that they could accomplish the segregation of duties just by doing it differently rather than adding more staff?
I would say probably not. The first paragraph underneath the bolded observation recommendation talks about a lack of secondary review in HR, and secondary review is important.
Then you have absences and unplanned absences, and then you really have segregation of duties problems.
Yep.
Thank you. Are we receiving and filing?
Yes, anybody, no more comments? Okay, so is there a motion to receive and
So
file?
moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Can I
Thank
ask one
you.
final question? So this is a report that was commenced in July of 2018. Were you involved in any other internal audit type reports for Moss Adams for the city?
Sure. I worked on the enterprise risk assessment
Okay.
back when we did that project. Mark, do you want to join me?
Just noting, we still haven't seen that audit.
You'll be seeing it in May.
Okay, thank you. That was the only question.
Asked and answered, or?
Well, I mean,
You need to wait,
there's been an
because we don't
audit
have
going on
quorum.
for 3 years.
Yeah.
And.
Sorry, Steve,
yeah.
we need to wait because we don't have a quorum.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
we need to wait for him to come back.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I don't.
There's no on-hold music, though.
Min did not
There's
want
no
to-
on-hold music.
Min was so tired of me.
screen right
Min was so tired of me asking that question, he had to leave the room.
He just knew what was coming.
So, when it does go in front of council.
We have to wait, though.
Oh, that's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's all right.
Bare minimum quorum.
Oh, I thought we had like a.
We were absent of min quorum.
So.
Pressure's on.
So, yes, so there was a internal controls review with a risk assessment focus. And so we had a meeting recently and decided the best course of action was to refresh that so that we could bring you back a report that is current versus giving you one that says, well, we're not sure where things stand now because enough time has passed by. So that's the plan, is to be able to bring that to you in May. And it'll be a refresh of that.
Just in the interest of transparency, so this work was started in June and it's reported out to us now. That other work was started 3 years ago. We've been asking to see the report and we have not seen it. So I don't know that the committee's satisfied seeing a freshened up report about conditions or controls or improvements that may have been freshened up or improved since then. We have been asking for it, so we can have that matter for commissioner referrals at the end. I don't know that we're satisfied seeing a cleaned up report of how things have been freshened up 2 to 3 to 4 years later. That's just a comment internally.
I do have one more question, a little unrelated to Commissioner Johnson, but as far as the previous report that we received, were we looking to make a recommendation to council as far as our inclination, as far as charter amendment versus municipal code or
Yeah,
versus
that's
city
what I
guideline?
Yeah, that's why I was very,
Or
yeah,
is it open to
confused.
interpretation
Right.
for us to simply receive and file it this way? As if we want, can we make guidance or recommendation to the council about that?
that we do this city.
It's
yeah.
typically done.
Well, I mean, I guess you can say anything you want, but you're, in essence, advisory. So usually you're receiving, but you can make your comments on top of what's been presented.
Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would recommend that we strongly look at changing up the charter. I mean, I think the charter needs to be changed. I think it's not accurate. It's not what we're even doing, and you know, I think a comprehensive charter review needs to be done, and I think that's what we should recommend to the council. Because there's, you know, not only amongst these roles, but there's other issues within the charter that needs to be changed as well.
Well, I think that you can certainly make that recommendation. There's worthwhile, certainly worthwhile across city needs to amend the charter or have a review of the charter. When it comes to this, my feeling is that I would not recommend it be a city guideline or policy that we go forward changing, because there is no enforcement mechanism essentially for that. There is no teeth to something like that.
Right.
I would, from a standpoint of cleaning up our house sooner rather than later, recommend it as a municipal code endorsement and ask the council to take up the charge of looking into our municipal code to make some changes in the near term, which doesn't preclude us from still amending the charter to go ahead and put those into granite, as it were. So-
Okay, well, I think what we should do then, I think we should entertain, you know, we can receive and file it, but I think we should make a motion, entertain a motion that we, you know, recommend that the council look at, because I'm in agreement with you that they look at making these recommendations and putting a little more teeth in there and making it as part of the municipal code changes.
With the idea of visiting,
yes.
this is part of part of the broader,
Charter
our
change.
our long-term strategic planning to clean up our charter.
Yeah,
So there are recommendations in the report to change all 3 levels.
Okay.
So what you would recommend to council, not that I'm going to write your resolution for you, but what you would recommend to council would be to review the charter and municipal code to align to the recommendations in the report, or consider the recommendations in the report related to charter and municipal code.
yeah.
I was just gonna, because one of the things you really want to do is the charter, you want to get more specific as you come down from charter to policy so that you have appropriate flexibility to adjust as you need to. And so really you need a rationalization of your charter and your code.
Right, taking all that out of the charter.
Yeah, you've got
Yes,
too much
exactly.
detail. We have
Right.
other clients that do the same thing. It's like
Right.
you're hamstringing yourself and where you have too much detail up here and it's too difficult to change.
Right.
Yeah.
So, is receiving and filing, I mean, consistent with the recommendations you've made is essentially what we're saying? I think that's correct?
I would venture to say that with the idea that it would be it would be the recommendation of this panel that we look to do something with municipal code first with the
Yeah.
future towards the charter amendments.
Yeah, yeah, because I think what you were saying was they were going to be looking at changing policy, really. And and this board is saying we would like them to look at changing the municipal code rather than
As the most
just-
effective means of enforcement.
Rather than just the policy. Because the way you were presenting it, you were saying that they were going to go towards the policy.
Well, our recommendation is ultimately you need to change your charter and code. Charter takes the longest amount of time, municipal code takes a shorter amount of time, but still is not an overnight thing. Whereas tomorrow, the city manager and clerk and treasurer could get together and write a policy that says
Right.
this is how we're delegating authority, right? And so as a stopgap measure, we need to do the policy, and then we can work on the charter and however long that takes.
I just think my recommendation or my idea would be that rather than have us spend time changing the policy, make recommendations within the policy guidelines to amend the municipal code. that if you're going to sit down and write out a change in policy, take that change in policy as a recommendation to the municipal code, to the council. That would be the quickest or the most efficient and most enforceable change to these guidelines.
Okay, I second that motion. Yeah.
But were you saying, Colleen, that you can have policy that contradicts the charter, but you cannot have municipal code that contradicts the charter?
We should be able to have you.
Yeah.
Can I clarify, policy or just internal departmental policies? No? Yes.
There's council policy, and then there's citywide policies,
Right.
and then there would be another layer of departmental policies. And the further you go down, like Mark said, the more detail you get.
The hierarchy.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's no reason you can't have policies that are approved by the council that still have sort of longevity to them.
Sure.
But you're more nimble.
Yeah.
And I think you can do a lot there.
And all we really want the policy to say is to clearly delegate authority,
Right.
because that's what's missing, is that delegation of authority.
And as, you know, in my opinion, the risk of this delegation that's been going on for so long, having an adverse effect, I think is low. So I wouldn't object to if we just waited, but is the most effective thing to do is to change a policy, to delegate, and then to move on. And I'm, as you know, not an expert on whether it's the municipal code or the charter. It's a more permanent, granting the authorities or changing the authorities at a higher level, and then, the delegation will no longer be necessary. I mean, all we're doing is codifying the fact that this is what's already happening. It says that the city clerk should do these financial functions, which they're not doing. So we can delegate those via policy and then move to change the city documents at a
At the
appropriate
level.
time.
Yeah.
Do you think that would be effective in closing some of these gaps and overlaps and other issues that we've experiencing? You listed it as significant, the idea that a personnel change can create a dramatic event within the city as things stand right now. Is that something that'll be?
If we didn't have Marnie to remember this all, we'd be,
Where would we be?
If we get a cowboy in who says, I want the finance to go back to the clerk, let's change the policy, and then somebody's going to be sitting here to say, why would we do that?
But
It's
if-
completely out of scope that the city clerk would be taking on the role of the CFO or the director.
But if it's in the code in anticipation of the charter change, then we don't have that issue.
But if
Because
it's,
that's-
or you could say though, but if it's in a council adopted policy, you would also have that too. It's there, you have to find the right level. I'm not saying I'm just saying each thing has its appropriate level that you want to go as high as, you want to basically keep it as low as you have to get the level of sort of sustainability that you want.
Well, to quote Commissioner Johnson, hope
is
is
not
not
a
a
strategy.
strategy. It is my favorite. So I still feel, I think we're saying the same things, but just in a little bit different way.
So maybe we strongly support the recommendations
There
made
you
by
go.
Moss.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. That's fine. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So we're on item number 8, fiscal year 2019-20 operating budget and capital improvement plan input to the city manager. Marnie.
Right. Good evening. So we have had our budget kickoff meeting. The departments are working on creating their budgets. They will turn them into finance by the end of the month, and we'll go from there preparing the document. So we like to come each year to the commissions and get your input before we're too far along in the process, and what you would like to see with the fiscal year 19-20 budget.
Well, the one thing that came out from the mid-year was that having more adequate detail on the decision package items and basically how they're being calculated, because we didn't you know, the last meeting, we recommended that more detail be given before the council even approved those decision packages.
And in fact, we prepared a letter that Chairman Samples sent to the city council.
Right. So City Council received the same decision packages in their admin report, but the department heads from the impacted departments
Right.
were there at the meeting and gave their explanations verbally, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, that would be our input, like, if we could have, I mean, that's my input, if we could have, you know, when you guys just kind of pull a number, an impact number, but if we could understand how that's derived or, you know, how that was calculated and more detailed information on that. And I would also like to understand more clearly any unfilled staff positions and how long they've been unfilled and such. If we could have that kind of detail be more upfront, and that we don't have to like really dive in and figure out the numbers and on what's vacant and things like that. So if it could be more apparent, and how long the vacancy has been there.
I'd really echo that as well, Marnie. Last year, we were through the processes of talking about the vacant positions. It was $720,000 ended up being the bottom line. It was a pretty big number for the three positions that were permanently sunsetted and the other 3 positions that were set aside for the year. And since we budget those in their entirety, all those vacant positions, it would be really helpful if we had an idea. I know the department heads, if I remember correctly, when we were speaking with the city manager, it was more along the lines of, what do you want to give up versus how long has this been vacant? So if we had some sort of a deep dive into the number of positions that are vacant, how long they've been vacant, and then the funds that would be encumbered as a result of that or freed up as a result of that vacancy, I think that would really be helpful in us making recommendations about how to find money where we don't have it.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, as far as I can recall, I think they were the biggest, really biggest budget, you know, issues and things that we tackled the last budget process, so. Do you guys have anything else?
To echo your first point, you know, we go back to those decision packages that said the police need $25,000 for training. That's not a decision-ready package that's presented to us. It didn't even say what the training was. It didn't discuss why the seized narcotic funds were inadequate to be used for that purpose. And, you know, we were left with the inability to approve that in any meaningful way. And so we just need more data with the decision packages. I'm just echoing your comment, emphasizing. Thank you.
Are there items from the strategic plan that are going to be part of this year's CIP that we should anticipate, that are significantly different, new projects that are coming on, something, if there are things that strategic plan that are going to be new to the CIP, that would be helpful also.
And you'll also be discussing the CIP portion of the budget at your next meeting. Your April meeting is the joint meeting with the Public Works Commission, with CIP being basically the topic.
Okay, anybody have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, looking forward to seeing it.
Okay, thank you, Marnie, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on item number 9, single audit report fiscal year 2017-18. Recommendation to receive and file. So Marnie has that.
All right, good evening again. Back in December, you saw the city's financial statements, and this is the one final piece of that. The CAFR has a deadline of December 31st. This single audit report has a deadline of March 31st. So it often falls to the lowest priority of the auditors in all their engagements, and taken up at a later date, still in time to meet the March 31st deadline. The single audit is all about grants, and the auditors do their separate test work on the grants that have federal funding. And those are actually listed out on page 6 of the single audit report. And the major programs this year, Section 8 housing is always a major program just because of its large dollars. And then this year, the second major program was Transportation Improvement Program, and you can see those descriptions there. Grants related to bus equipment, bus shelters and benches, and the transit terminal. But there were no findings this year for the report, and we are all set to pass it along from here to City Council on Tuesday, and then to the agencies that we have to do by the end of the month.
Is that the bus equipment, the bus shelters and benches, is that for the terminal over there by the Galleria?
The last item, the transit terminal, that one they've, of course, been in the design phase for a really long time, and there's still expenditures there. Bus equipment is typically the buses themselves, and the bus shelters and benches are throughout the city.
Okay, so that could be throughout the city, anywhere along the lines. One of the things that I noticed when these reports are presented is they basically say, here's our report, but we don't express an opinion on the effectiveness of this report. It's we do not express an opinion on the effectiveness of the city's internal control over compliance.
They don't want to get sued.
We did not identify any deficiencies in internal control.
I can help you with that.
Thank you.
It's a financial audit. So they're auditing the federal grants, and what they're saying is in the schedule attached. It's the CFA, Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards.
Okay.
They are confirming that these are the federal grants that we've received for the year, and they have been engaged to do an audit in accordance with governmental auditing standards, and this is a single audit that requires them to opine based upon these federal grants. And the scope of their audit that they are required to do and engaged to do did not encompass work such that they could render opinion on the internal controls. And if it sounds like I may have written one of those in my life, or that I'm having one issued for my company tomorrow, then we have. And so that's nothing to worry about. It's completely standard language. And in any of the audits, even the financial audits, they do not do work sufficient to render opinion based upon the internal controls. That's why we have Moss Adams here to drill into talking about segregation of duties and things like that.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you.
Nice work.
Can I have a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, now it's our stuff here. Number 10, provide edits to the letter for the upcoming strategic planning workshop.
So this is the same exact letter that you had last month, and you had wanted to take a harder look at it and include some more items. So it's here again for you to take another pass at. I will point out that Commissioner Chun wasn't able to be here tonight, but he had sent what he would like included as the last page of the report.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that one too, on that. Getting back on the purchasing side of things, we're just dealing with the professional services and the fact that there's no guidelines for competitive bid process for it. I don't know, my recommendation would be like, I mean, we have, based on section 2(6.07, it outlines the other procurement it goes with, let me see, where was that one? Oh, it's on what you sent us in the
Right,
in
the
the
whole,
municipal code, yeah.
yeah, this
So if
was
you
just
look
one,
at- Yeah,
one part of that whole section, and I had sent you the full
Right.
section.
that's the purchasing procedure, right? So were we thinking about, we already said that these limits on the, I mean, it's pretty erroneous. I mean, they've got like, if you look at the purchasing procedure 2-6.07, they've got 3 levels here, and they've got quite a bit of competitive, if it's over 35,000, it's like they're saying we have to get 10 competitive bids, which seems excessive to me. So I guess what I'm doing is I'm thinking we could recommend a change to these levels and then have the professional services conform to that.
They'd have to change the municipal code to change those levels, the city council.
Right.
And
But
they-
can't we
they
make that
actually-
recommendation?
They actually did somewhat recently. It had been decades since that had been changed, and then I believe about 2 years ago, they changed to these levels.
But if you're talking about for the purpose of the professional services, and Hermosa has dollar limits,
Yes,
but dollar limits have gotten us
I know.
got us
That's
into a
not-
pickle. Previously, witnessed the $15,000 for capital
Right.
improvement projects,
Right.
which is another discussion that we've had. So you may want to, if you're going to include dollar limits, you may want to index it. Or do
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you want to go for the total value of the contract? And my thought was that it doesn't
Manhattan
reference.
Beach also has dollar figures as far as for value of purchases. They also have dollar figures.
And Hermosa Beach does that as well.
And actually Hermosa and Manhattan, they actually have a manager, a procurement manager, a purchasing manager, which I guess we don't have that, yeah.
Just as a point of order, is this discussion within the scope of Warren's letter?
So this letter,
Talking about investment advisors and things like that?
this
That was
letter is
second.
simply, you are suggesting to the
All
mayor
sufficient.
and city council what you would like included on the next strategic plan.
Okay.
And so that can
Can be other issues
encompass
besides this, yeah.
anything. It can encompass,
So we want to
please,
make this
during the
broader.
next 6 months, we want purchasing limits changed, or we,
Reviewed and updated as appropriate.
yeah.
Right. So, I mean, this all came out because, we found out that there's no requirement for bid process on professional services. So we're trying to make a recommendation to council to
So
fill that gap.
I would add that if we have the professional services, that no professional service contract be renewed for a period greater than, or request, I should say, to consider that no professional contract be renewed for beyond, say, 5 years without being bid out for or sourced out for competitiveness and effectiveness. Maybe do that instead of a dollar amount. I would also ask, I noticed that, and you, please correct me, Marnie, somewhere in our code, I didn't see it, but I'm sure I just missed it, where it deals with conflicts, that no officer shall have an interest in any contract made in their official capacity. That's in our code somewhere right now, isn't it? Okay, but if it's not in the code already, I would ask to consider as part of a strategic long-term plan recommendation, it be included that according to the government code sections, no officer or employee shall have an interest in any contract made in their official capacity, nor be purchases at any sale or vendors at any purchase made by them in their official capacity. It seems, it's part of the government code, and it seems to be something that would be commonsensical,
Yeah.
but we should codify that somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that we should write it here, but we should recommend that certainly a conflict of interest policy be
Yeah.
reviewed and put in place.
Yeah.
That's a better way of putting it, thank you.
Yeah, conflict, I like that, conflict of interest policy, yeah.
So as this is, I'm caught up back to where we were some time ago, thank you. I just want to be careful with the professional services. Remember, we had the discussion regarding banks.
Right.
We don't want to go out and bid banks every 5 years just for that purpose. There's no real practice to change banks just because. So if they're included under the professional services, you run into this problem where, you're bidding it based upon, and I think I understand the good practice you're trying to bring in place here, which is to say, I'm working with my friend the attorney, my friend the consultant, and they just keep going and going and going. That's not the same as working with Union Bank or Bank of America, and we're all hooked into their computer system.
Right.
And we review their costs on an ongoing basis. So is there, language that we can protect the fact that we don't have to, and this does happen. They're irritated, Union Bank doesn't want to propose because they know you're not going to change from Bank of America. So I just wanted to point that out. We don't want to make it so broad that things that have a good reason to be sole source are not allowed to be.
I understand.
And there's
It's-
probably few instances.
It's a point well taken. I think maybe if the language is reviewed for cost and effectiveness, so that
Rather
we
than
know,
bid,
so that we
yeah.
know that we're doing the right thing, that it's at least getting looked at.
That's correct. There are very good reasons to do sole source or limited review.
Certainly.
But it does need to be reviewed, yes.
And I think that we would get into some difficulty if we decided to start trying to shave off, well, not for this, and not for this.
Don't see the effective language, so I agree, yeah.
So perhaps then to keep it broad, but yet effective, to have them, professional services reviewed for cost and effectiveness a certain number of years, and I'd be comfortable with a different number of years rather than 5.
Right.
And then perhaps an if you wanted to go with the value of a contract, so that some of those contracts may not end up being reviewed for a period longer than that.
And the teeth in this is the transparency, and to not allow the department head to say, oh, yes, I reviewed that.
Right, somehow formulating language so that it is not a paper tiger.
Right.
Yes.
Well,
So we can come up with language to have that, so considered in the process.
A guideline or practice, well, I think if you make it, we talked about policy a little bit earlier, if you make it a written practice that needs to be signed off
Right,
on,
right.
that department head has gone ahead and then would have to create a contemporaneous log or
Record,
document
right.
showing that this has been done.
So Marnie, do you follow where we're going?
so what do you want to do,
Sometimes
every
you
2
take the
years
first
then?
shot at writing our letters for us. Would you like to do that?
I can do that.
Should we do, well, what is what are our parameters for that? Is it a timeframe or, and money-wise, or are we just going for, because you said you went out 5 years. I don't know if maybe they should be, if we're not doing competitive, if we're not saying it has to be a competitive bid, if it has to just be reviewed, I think every 2 years should be, is a reasonable.
We could compromise at 3. 2 years comes up awfully fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
By the time,
Most of our contracts are longer than.
by the time you
Well, I wouldn't
know
say
how to
most,
work
a
with them,
lot.
you're
Right.
14 months into the engagement.
I'd be comfortable with 3.
3, okay.
It's a recommendation anyway, so.
Okay, so we're at 3 years and not having a dollar figure. And then also adding that there be no conflict of interest policy enforced within the contracting.
And that one I was
procurement.
going to look and see whether we already have such an item elsewhere, because no doubt we do, but I
Yeah,
do need to
yeah.
check.
Do-
We'll only include it if it's not.
Does each department have a written procurement procedure?
No. There's a citywide one, which really just says, here's how you implement the municipal code. It's really just the municipal code with more detail, much as Moss Adams was talking about. Municipal code is, charter should be hardly any details, municipal code more details, and then the policy is the full details.
What I'm thinking of is a procedure by which the department head, in selecting that vendor, then creates some sort of record as to why they selected that vendor. Maybe not why, that might be a little strong, but the idea that here's the vendor I selected, here were the vendors I communicated with, and here is the end result. So that if someone goes back down the line, we can say that, well, wait a second, we know that this is how this process worked in the interest of transparency, that it wasn't a matter of that department head simply going to one person, but, well, I did an investigation into the marketplace, here's what I did. So that there's some sort of record for the public to see what procedures our city is going through in order to procure services. Some written procedure to indicate that, or some procedure that creates a record of what was done. Otherwise.
And I think that's the reason why the other cities have a purchasing manager in place, because then it centralizes, and probably would amount to what you're suggesting, that there is records or as to how the purchase was decided on. And I think that's maybe why they have, purchasing manager.
So in those interests, we would, you don't want to go too deep and create an entire evaluation criteria that a procurement personnel person would have an evaluation criteria, there'd be a team there'd be information gathering, be a number of different things that go on
Right.
that the procurement manager would be doing.
Right.
That we don't currently have. So I'd at least like to create some sort of an outline or skeletal framework for each department head to follow, and then that it is available if somebody wants to take a look at how that happened. Instead of, well, we don't know, they just issued a requisition form.
Which that really is what happens in conjunction with the municipal code. So when a purchase order is requested by a department, in order for, because our department creates the purchase order, the department does what we call a requisition, requesting a purchase order. At the time, finance changes that requisition to a purchase order. They do not do that until we have the documentation that says the municipal code was followed. So if the municipal code says, because you're at this dollar amount, you have to have 3 bids, we require that.
Right. But the professional services
The
don't have
documentation
any
is
of that.
attached that there were 3 bids.
Right.
Or at a lower level, all I have to get is quotes. It doesn't have to be a
Right.
formal bid. And so those quotes need
see,
to be
that's the
attached, or a
reason-
summary of those quotes. And so we are already doing that, making sure that the municipal code is being followed.
Well, that's my whole thing, that's why I was saying maybe, we should be putting purchasing or putting professional services in more of a formal thing like the purchasing is in the municipal code. But I know we don't want to earmark it like that, but there, what Marty's saying is, yes, there's procedures because this municipal code exists, but that doesn't exist for professional services, so.
The problem is, I think, Marnie,
not
is that
getting
that's not
reported.
working.
Yeah, because it's not
I'm
getting
sorry, but
reported.
it's not working. We're finding ourselves in contracts that go on for 5, 10, 15, and 20 years that never get reviewed. Because that department head, they may be following the municipal code, but the municipal code doesn't have any standards of review for something like that. There's no evaluation.
That's what Commissioner Esser is saying. It's all about the municipal code. So, the start of this letter is, let's change the municipal code in regards to professional services.
Let's change the policy, because policy is equally enforceable, and you can do it as soon as the council approves it, right? Council policy or require.
Well, even municipal code is council level authority. It takes, 2 readings of by the council. So it's just a little bit slower, but it's still.
So you know what we're saying, Marnie. We want transparency. We want it reviewed as a opening suggestion every 3 years. Broad procurement guidelines, and that there's a thoughtful, documented process for review and evaluation on a triennial basis.
Okay, so we don't want to put in any kind of requirement at any certain level for competitive bid?
I don't have a level of knowledge to look
Yeah,
at
to
where
do
the
that,
contracts
right.
are and to draw that number.
Yeah.
But again, if we're using banking services as the example.
They're probably not that expensive.
No.
They are.
They are?
Yeah.
Shouldn't be.
They would fall above.
Above the 50 or 35 that
Yeah.
they've got.
Yeah, 35.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but not like, some
But this,
external legal
but this
fees and
municipal
things.
code, this has to be, I think we should also make a recommendation that the council look at this purchasing, the levels they've got here at 2.6, because this is onerous. 35,000.
It used to be 5.
So being that, as we
that's-
try to craft this, we don't know the levels or the details, is the recommendation that is part of the strategic planning process,
Yeah.
that we.
We
that
don't
they
think
have
those
a
levels, yeah.
Revamping.
They should
of the
revamp 'em.
Purchasing and procurement guidelines for all city procured purchases on an overall basis.
Yeah, including professional services. Yeah, I think
All.
that would be.
All city
yes.
services,
All
including
city-
professional services.
Including professional services.
If we could, I have a list of other suggestions or some other suggestions. One is an evaluation criteria, so some criteria in selecting the vendors. I know that we have, a vendor list, like a pre-approved vendor list that's used for some public works projects, as an example. Do we have a vendor list for all projects, including professional services, or is it mainly for public works?
Public Works.
Okay, so some evaluation criteria then for the professional services as well? A disclosure process? I think
Disclosure
we've
just
talked about.
meaning providing documentation.
Documentation, yes, please. For certain projects that are CIP projects and other public works projects, I don't think that this is workable, but I'd like to at least throw it out there. Is there a procurement disclosure that goes out? Say the city of Redondo Beach is interested in hiring an asset management firm, and throwing it out there in some way in a publication or out on our website to announce that the city of Redondo Beach is interested in having this contract coming up for review. If you're interested in providing services, please contact the city.
So So if we're doing a formal bid, it does include that process. If it is quotes, it's simply the department calling, writing, whatever works best for that item, and
But then
obtaining a written
our
quote.
universe in that case of professional services is limited to who that department head knows or contacts.
Yeah, and keep in mind also, if we do this by policy or by rule, we're hampering the agility of the process, because then you'll have a 30-day cooling off period to wait for people to respond to wherever you're posting this query out at, or whatever that is, 7 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And, that is done for large federal and maybe state contracts. That there's regulations. Did you know that NASA is putting out this? You have the opportunity to do that. For the type of contracts we're talking about, for attorneys and things like that, that one particular, and I agree with providing outline, but the one particular public notice could be a little bit onerous for some of those.
Okay. I'm just going to use an example here. This is what I'm trying to, there's a couple of examples of things that I'm trying to look towards fixing that have been problems in the past or are current problems that we've had. I've talked about it a lot before, and that is it's now been solved, but the tourism contract that we had, that was with the Tourism Bureau, went on and siphoned millions of dollars away from the city because it was never reviewed. Our current asset management, so our city investment guidelines requires competitive bidding for our asset management. To ensure that the purchase of city investments is obtained in the most cost-effective and efficient manner, City Treasurer will encourage competitive bidding for city investment transactions. On an annual basis, the City Treasurer will accept applications from qualified members of the investment broker-dealer community interested in bidding on city investment instruments. The City Treasurer shall establish on an annual basis a limited array of qualified broker-dealers to serve the city investment opportunities. Selection criteria for inclusion on the city's annual list of broker-dealers will be based upon merit, expertise, and performance. So this is in our investment guidelines right now, but
it's
I
not being
couldn't
done.
find any evidence of that being done over the last 5 years.
Okay, that's where you got it, that's in investment guidelines? Yeah.
So the investment policy is what
How do we
you're-
solve a problem like that?
So I think we've outsourced this to these folks as our active investment, rather than us engaging a number of broker-dealers and getting bids. And Steve, of course, is left, but I think that's part of the purpose of outsourcing it, is that they oversee the process of reviewing the investment managers and the broker-dealers.
Well, FTN
I
is
totally-
a broker-dealer.
You need to get a little closer to the mic. I'm not-
The problem being that, with an example of our asset management firm, that there were 3 providers that were sourced in 2013. The contract was renewed in 2016. The contract was renewed in 2019. So if this is part of our investment guidelines right now, and we're not following it, and I don't know, we'll dig around and see if this has been done. It could have been done. It's very possible. I don't know, and we'll ask and find out. If we're not following our guidelines, is it because they're not in the municipal code, or because things have changed and we're not updating our guidelines? For professional services for asset management, shouldn't go 7 years without talking to other
Yeah.
managers.
Agreed.
Yep.
So that one, if that's the investment policy, that's what you as a commission review each year. So
Right.
I would certainly save that for its next coming around, that, either that be changed to reflect current practices, or, that the.
Or we enforce it.
that
But I think
we
that's-
really like that, we want to make sure it's being done, or.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's more specific to how we create a policy, an effective policy or guideline or code rather than this specific thing. It's not about this specific thing as much as
I understand.
about cleaning up the practice.
And I understand, and I think that's why a broad recommendation that all city purchasing and procurement activities should have a broad set of guidelines. And it should state that no individual department may write other contravening guidelines other guidelines that contravene the broad guidance that the city purchasing and procurement guidelines encompass.
Right, and that's why it should be in the municipal code, because then, you know, those type of guidelines, so that the policy doesn't,
Yeah,
You
I
know,
think,
I don't-
Yeah,
I think
because
we're in agreement,
Yeah.
and that we don't want the fire department to write their own set of guidelines that
Right.
contravene.
Being-
Oh, well, this says every 3 years, but, you know, fire trucks last a long time, so we're gonna say every 15 years. Well, every time you buy one, you gotta go through the process.
right,
And of course, the municipal code written as it is now, professional services basically have, you know,
there's no guidelines.
no guidelines, so any guidelines do not contradict.
Right, okay.
Okay, so, so you're pretty much, yeah, so you understand where we're heading, and you'll write up some, okay. And then obviously, I would also like to include, you know, because we already discussed this at the last meeting, about the fact that, that any kind of refinance or issuance of bonds or whatnot, I mean, that should really be coming to the Budget and Finance
Right.
Commission. So we need to include that also in the letter as part of the strategic plan recommendation.
Because you could look at this as outside the scope of purchasing something.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a totally separate
Yep.
item.
As something towards the strategic plan, Marnie, is it something where we can ask for Joe and Mike and your team to discuss whether or not we should have a full-time procurement officer? I mean, that would be part of strategic planning. Not amending the municipal code, obviously, but
Right.
whether or not it would be appropriate for us, just as a recommendation or a question, to ask whether or not we should have a full-time procurement officer.
And I mean, that can always be one of the bullet points at your strategic plan. Consider, you know, making that review within the next 6-month objectives.
You don't have an objection to that?
All right, I think your point is to evaluate the benefit.
Yes.
Evaluate the benefit.
Yes.
Not that we recommend.
No, not recommending that we have, but
Yeah,
to
that
examine whether
it
or not
would
it'd be
be reviewed.
appropriate.
Yeah.
Or to find if there's somebody who can fulfill that role existing.
Yeah,
because
I would think it has to be
rarely see you
existing.
asking to add staff.
Yeah.
I have not heard that
No,
one
we're not
before.
having staff.
It wasn't necessarily what I was doing.
Someone that would take on that role. And, yeah,
Sort of
Okay.
centralized,
Yeah.
okay.
So I'd like to ask that question, have it discussed.
yeah.
Is that,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think you put it better than that.
Evaluate the
Evaluate the appropriateness of it.
appropriateness and/or potential benefits. And just, you know, as a matter of wordsmithing, Warren's signature should be Budget and Finance Commissioner. There's an ampersand after budget, I think, or the word "and," whichever we use.
well, we're gonna, you're just gonna add this,
It's going to be one letter rather than separate letters?
yes.
Okay, that's fine.
It's gonna be one letter.
All right, thank you.
That's gonna be, yeah, separate bullet points, right.
Got it.
Does anybody have anything else that we want the strategic plan? It could be,
I think we have added a few teeth here and there.
When is the meeting for strategic planning?
They haven't said it
They
yet.
haven't said it yet?
They have not said it yet. It's starting to look like it'll be late April.
all right, so, where are we at now, sorry.
So let me ask you the mechanics of this, because typically you would direct me then to work with the chairman to finalize the letter. Without the chairman here, do you still want to do it that way when he returns, or would you like to have me work with somebody else?
I'm not sure. I don't know. Well, you want me and him to work with you with the letter? Since
That's
that'll
okay,
work?
the two of
Yeah.
them is okay?
Yeah.
That'll work?
I think it works. 2 people.
Okay, so item number,
Make a motion to, is there an action item to receive, for that, Marnie, the item 10?
I think it was
beyond
just
what we've
provide
done?
edits.
Yeah, so
We've provided
Your-
input.
your recommendation would be to have staff finalize the letter with the assistance and
If necessary, I move
agreement.
to request staff to consider our inputs and to prepare another draft of the letter.
And actually, well, I'm trying to think whether
We don't want to wait until, it
There
might not
will
make it to the
be-
Should've
strategic
missed.
plan.
Submit it.
time, because since you're meeting with Public Works Commission,
April 22nd.
yeah, and if they did it like I think one of the possible dates is like the 23rd of April or something
our
like that. That's
next-
calling it really
Our
close.
next meeting will be April what?
22nd.
I think it's the 22nd,
That
yeah.
late?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're actually taking on Public Works Commission state.
Authorize Don and Mel to issue the
Yeah.
letter.
Yep.
Let's do that, please, Marnie.
Okay, so
So
you
we
guys
did with Mel
motion,
last time.
yeah.
Do we need to memorialize that? So
Commissioners.
if so required, I move to authorize Commissioners Samples and Escher to issue the letter on our behalf.
Second.
Edit and issue.
All approved?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Passed. Okay, so now we're on item number 11, member items and referrals to staff for budget and finance. Anybody have anything?
Well, I do have one.
Okay.
So again, we had Moss Adams here, and I had the opportunity to ask them, have they issued a prior report, which we have not been given access to? And it seemed to be affirmative that they had, and that they wished or had been instructed to go and edit that report that is several years old to reflect current conditions. So, given the interest of transparency and the fact that, if only myself, I've been asking for this report for several years, I'm making a request and referral that we see the report and/or draft report as issued by Moss Adams on the internal controls for the city.
Want to try and give a date?
If I say the word now, will it help?
ASAP?
No, I mean, I can't conceive of an instance in which an accounting firm's internal control report would be outside the scope of this commission. So I don't know who needs to explain that to me, whether it's the city manager or city attorney, if it's going to be withheld from us, because otherwise it appears that there is an internal control report commissioned by the city and prepared by Moss Adams that for years has been withheld outside the scope of this commission. And without further information, it begins to feel inappropriate to me that we wouldn't have that.
I have a question also, please, Marnie. The city council funded report on the viability of the fire department going to county. It's essentially an economic evaluation. Is that something, a report that we can get to take a look at to see what the numbers are like? Because it affects so many of the things that we do here.
Yeah.
You're talking about internal service funds, you're talking about personnel budgeting, you're talking about CalPERS, we're talking about all kinds of different things that if the county fire department, or if we go to county or we don't go to county, are going to touch on what we do here. Is that something where we can get a copy of that report and look at it?
I can't say for certain, but I think it's going to council Tuesday night. So it may be even available, right now with that agenda.
And under the agenda, yeah.
Okay.
Well, is that going to be, they're going to provide the full report in the public agenda items?
As far as I know,
Do you know, Marnie, I think it was 50,000, how much was it that was authorized
Oh,
or
it was
appropriated for that? $35,000 for the report? Is that just for the initial report, or is that for anything following it up? Because I think staff, we're reviewing it rather than sending it out to somebody else.
right. I honestly can't
Don't know? Okay.
remember whether we had to pay to get, this first proposal, or I know to proceed there's a cost, and I don't know if that's the only cost, is if we want to proceed down the road, or if there was also one to get the initial. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, if the council's looking at it to make, I'd be surprised if they're looking at it to make a decision yea or nay next week. But-
It would basically be, continue down the road, or
Cut it off.
let's stop right here.
Okay. All right,
It wouldn't be, you're right, it would not be, let's go county.
Right.
Or let's stay city.
if
It
they,
would
if
just
they
be-
continue, if they decide on Tuesday night, if it's on the agenda Tuesday night to continue examining it and going down the road, I think it'd be worthwhile for us to take a look at the numbers behind that because of the significant impact across the budget of a move like that. I think it would be worthwhile for Budget and Finance to look at that. And I don't know if I'm the only one or everyone's in.
No, I agree.
Agree.
Yeah.
Almost regardless, because if they don't move forward and the report says we're going to save $6 million a year,
Yeah,
this
right.
commission would ask the question, why? What were the reasons?
So we should look at it
I think we
maybe.
should look at it.
Okay, let's do that.
And if it's on the agenda, I don't know if the report's publicly posted anyway, but I think that's a good recommendation.
Yeah.
And if it is, as I've done some other times, I'll go ahead and send you that report if it is on this particular coming agenda.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, but then I think as Commissioner Johnson said, whether or not they move forward or not with it, it'd be worthwhile for us to review that, take a look at it, since we've paid for it and it's there. That's all I had. Thank you.
All right.
That's all I have.
Okay, so I motion to adjourn the meeting. Budget and Finance Commission.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Good meeting.